Welcome back to Articulated Points. This is our third episode, believe it or not. We've made it this far. With me, as always, is Patrick Stewart. He's my main man here. That sounds terrible.
Hey, no, it works. You know, we've made it to 3 episodes. I think that means it means that we have a little ways to go before we are a solid podcast that's been around a while. But it means we're making it to a 3rd episode, and I'm happy to do it because it's always fun.
And now we can do a top 3 episodes list.
That's true. You know. We can have all of our, like, the top guests lists. We can do the top topics list. It'll be great.
Clickbait, y'all.
Right.
Alright, for this episode, we're going to do a little look at the smallest G.I. Joe, world's smallest G.I. Joe, and we're going to take a look at some Star Tours vehicles. And at the end of things, we might have a little more to discuss, so with that, Patrick, take it away.
I'm kind of a fan of this thing now. I guess let me just go into the details from here.
In late 2016, the world's smallest G.I. Joe action soldier started appearing on shelves at stores such as Cracker Barrel and Toys R Us soon thereafter. Featuring miniaturized versions of classic toys, the world's smallest line from Super Impulse includes a variety of nostalgic brands represented by one or a few items. The phrase "yes, actually works" appears on each world's smallest package. In the case of G.I. Joe, this refers to the figure's 4 points of articulation and possibly the lifelike flocked hair.
I should probably mention that the Super Impulse website indicates that the head is articulated, but I have yet to actually make one of mine move. Not long after the figure appeared online, it was quickly discovered that there was a variation in the way that the figure had been packaged. Original figures were found holding the binoculars by the strap, while later figures were found with the binoculars more prominently featured in a separate bubble. The first one that I received had been picked up by my brother at Cracker Barrel, and it was the version that featured the binoculars separate in the bubble. Fast forward to 2018, and Toys R Us was unfortunately going out of business. I stopped by there several times, as I'm sure many of us did, and picked up a few of these figures because they were there and they were cheap, and I was just in the mood to buy something. But then when comparing them to the one that I had received from Cracker Barrel, I noticed that the binoculars had been changed. Although the shape of the tray that held them in had remained the same, the strap had now been removed. So in order to do a complete comparison, I decided to open it. To my surprise, this was not the biggest thing that had been altered. While the original hips were ball joints, they've now been replaced by flat angle joints. And while this may seem at first like a major downgrade, as I was taking pictures for this, I started to realize why this change may have been made. The ball joints have a tendency to pop off easily, and as a trinket that may get shuffled around from place to place, there's certainly some utility in a design that does a better job of keeping the figure staying together. As a side note, the image that has appeared online of the toy's earlier design has articulation that just goes horizontally, which would have maybe made the feet twist out a little bit, but would have significantly hindered articulation. It also lacked the iconic holster sculpted on the torso.
Additionally, I found that the flocked hair had changed. The earlier figure had thicker black hair, while the later one had brown hair that formed closer to the head. While 2 series of blind boxes have carried forward previous World's Smallest releases, G.I. Joe has not yet been included so far in those blind boxes. While I mentioned earlier that several brands are represented by just one item, there are brands such as Hot Wheels and Barbie that have had several items released. Do you think G.I. Joe could potentially have another release, or is this just a one-off? What's your take on this?
I should point out the label on the package says Man of Action, and while that is an adventure team member, the Man of Action doesn't have a beard. A figure that has a beard that isn't just green fatigues would be the Talking Adventure Team Commander, but most of those had 4 pockets on the shirt and was left untucked. A later release gave him just the top 2 pockets, which you could then tuck in, which would then make it look more like this guy, but yeah, that's not the Man of Action. Also, I should point out, the artwork used on there, that's an Action Soldier artwork.
It does actually say Action Soldier, like down underneath the G.I. Joe logo. Up at the top it says Man of Action, but then down here it says G.I. Joe Action Soldier. So that's why I was referring to.
He's not an action soldier either.
Right, right. Yeah, but overall, I kind of like the Super Impulse line. There's a lot of stuff in it that's fun. I really like Stretch Armstrong. Mine seems to be hardening a bit. I like have to warm him up prior. Like if I try to bend him right now, it's not gonna work so well. Um, but once he gets warmed up, he stretches a lot.
My Stretch Armstrong from the 90s, I broke him almost immediately, it seems like. And then, they said use a Band-Aid to seal him up. Okay, but that means you have to have a Band-Aid on him for the rest of his life. And then he started hardening. So.
Yeah, and that's still an easy tear point, I think. I think that the Band-Aids were more a confidence, give the kids the confidence to stretch him as much as possible, thinking that he's not going to break or that he's going to be easy to patch up. But that didn't, I don't think that ever really worked so well. I'm pretty sure the 70s one came with Band-Aids as well. I also like their Rock'em Sock'em robots. The heads don't pop up, well, they pop up, they don't pop up as high as the vintage ones do, and they don't make that sound, but there's still metal pieces in there, which I was kind of impressed with, and the arms function very well. And they come with a plastic base so that they stand up easily, but inside the package, they're actually not on the base. So they kind of make nice little action figures, but then you can just kind of put them on the base in order to slide them around if you actually were going to try to play a game with them and go from there. And then, of course, it wouldn't be like us to not take something that's not G.I. Joe and make G.I. Joe out of it. So here is the Super Impulse Light Bright. I was really hoping whenever I bought this that I would be able to just use the vintage G.I. Joe Light Bright templates to make anything that I wanted. Yeah, just shrink it down. But there's not actually the same number of holes on this as there is the large one. And once I got it in hand, I started to see why. These pegs are actually very, very small, and to have enough of them to equal the full-size Light Bright, it probably would have to be much larger than it currently is. So that kind of was a little disappointing, but I managed to make it into G.I. Joe anyway. And then I like these a lot as well, and they are the Tiny Arcade subdivision of World's Smallest that's also from Super Impulse. I think there's supposed to be 2 waves of these, but so far I've only seen wave 1. The first one that I saw, P-Love from Joe Customs actually picked up at Cracker Barrel on our way out to Assembly Required. And I thought the thing was awesome because it is scaled to work very well with G.I. Joe figures. For some reason, there's a keychain on it. I don't really need the keychain, but whenever you power this thing on, it really does look like the full-size arcade machine, and you can play the complete arcade game. Wave 1 has 4 different games in it. Wave 2 is supposed to have 4 games in it as well. I haven't seen those. At Cracker Barrel, I believe it was about $20, but right now at Walmart, they're $13. And you can find them in the electronics section. So I really think these are cool. I like a lot of the Super Impulse stuff. Super Impulse seems to be hit and miss. The Rock'em Sock'em robots I found at the Hallmark store. This week at Target, I actually saw a display of some nostalgic stuff, various nostalgia brands, and they had the Rock'em Sock'em robots there. I didn't see what price they had on them, but they actually had a great display of Super Impulse stuff at the Hallmark store, and the prices there were really competitive and good.
I also feel like we should point out, even if it is the world's smallest G.I. Joe, it really isn't. Just right here, these Gentle Giant ones are definitely smaller. I think the mission scale Sigma 6 figures might be a little bit smaller than this guy. I definitely know the Kre-o figures are. The one wave of Microverse G.I. Joe sets had a small figure in there, and then the 2 years worth of Micro Machines G.I. Joe sets had figures in it that were definitely smaller.
Yeah, it's probably the Micro Machines that are actually the smallest G.I. Joes in the world, I'm guessing. We can't forget that Takara put out a line called G.I. Joe's G.I. Joe, which was basically a G.I. Joe figure that would go with G.I. Joe figures, if that makes sense.
They were scaled to look like your original 1960s G.I. Joes, but in scale to be the size of a G.I. Joe to this figure. So about an inch tall.
And they came with a box too. Those were really cool. I'd still like to pick up a set of those. Yeah, so I guess maybe it's a different world's smallest G.I. Joe, but they're still fun. I like them. And I bet a lot of people picked these up whenever they were at Toys R Us cheap. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to point out that the ones that I had gotten initially at Cracker Barrel were a different mold. You know, I'm sure there are going to be some people out there who would prefer the ball jointed hips. So it's a fun thing.
I will say this, it is easier to stand the swivel jointed body because they just, they come right down to flat. Whereas with the ball joints, you kind of have to wobble them around a little bit so that they would stand better, but I do like the increased articulation of the ball jointed hips.
I agree. Yeah, it's a little debatable. I think that the second ones, though, definitely, if you're going to just buy one sight unseen off of eBay, you really need to be prepared for the flocked hair to look like a mess. I know that a lot of the ones that I saw, the spot that they left blank for the lips to show through was all the way down on his chin, and it just didn't look very good. But that seems to actually be a little bit better on the later released ones with the swivel hips. So it is, it's a little hit and miss. They're just kind of there for fun. I wouldn't expect like high articulation or detail out of these.
The flocking on mine isn't too bad on my ball jointed, but it's definitely asymmetrical.
Yeah, you could see in the video that the one that I had opened, actually, well, that's sad. The one that I kept sealed, I'm sure this is the reason why I kept it sealed. The face on this one's actually really, really nice. Whereas the one that I had in the video, the one that I opened, he kind of had like flocked hair going all over his face. He almost looked like a Sasquatch from $6 Million Man or something. I don't know. It was a little he's been out, hasn't had the chance to get to the G.I. Joe Clippers yet and take care of that. Anyway, that's a whole lot to say about such a little installment in G.I. Joe. I definitely would like to see more of these. Personally, I think that if they went the route of a real American hero, I think that may actually sell a little bit. Well, I shouldn't say it'll sell better, because these did sell, it seemed like they sold well. They were everywhere. But I think that would give a little bit more of an opportunity to hit a different crowd, I should say, because there still is a little bit of a different crowd that is hit when you do a real American hero versus doing vintage 12-inch. So, and I will say that those figures that you pointed out earlier, the Gentle Giant ones, I always thought those were strange because they're not articulated at all, which I guess I wasn't really expecting articulation in figures that size. But the thing that really blew my mind, because I'm weird and I had to open them up, even though I don't think they were meant to be opened. I noticed that the sculpt of the arms was reversed on them. Rock and Roll has the Snake Eyes sculpt arms, and Snake Eyes has the Rock and Roll sculpt arms, with like the sleeve way up here and the pockets on the side. It's a little strange that they did that reversal of designs. I imagine that was something maybe while they were clicking through their 3D models that they forgot to spin around, or maybe they just did that thinking, hey, this will be funny because nobody can see these because they're so tiny. I didn't really even notice it until I was trying to take some pictures of them. But just a fun little fact regarding those.
Well, you say you don't know if they're meant to be removed, but obviously I've opened mine up too. It's interesting, though, that while it is largely a solid figure, the arms are a separate piece. So it's like the head, waist, torso, and legs are all one two-part thing that just kind of glues around the arms. And so I think it's a construction error or a molding error. They put the wrong molds with the wrong colors, and they just had to go with it.
That would make sense, that if they tooled them up to have the arms with the wrong figure, that they would just be like, well, these are shot in black, so they're going to go on Snake Eyes rather than having to repaint them. That would make a lot of sense.
And since these were only ever convention exclusive figures, I don't think they felt a big desire to go through an entire recall.
Okay, so that brings us to our next topic. I believe you're going to talk to us about kind of heading back to the parks again, aren't we? But a little bit specific with Star Wars, correct?
We're heading back to the parks of a sort. So, as of this recording, we're still a few months out from the opening of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland. And, of course, a little bit later, over in Disney World at the Disney's Hollywood Studios. We're all anticipating that, but today we're talking about the original Disney attraction in the Disney parks, Star Tours. Now, Star Tours first opened in 1987 at Disneyland. 10th anniversary of A New Hope. Seemed like a big deal at the time. Kind of was a big deal at the time for me. Definitely, it was the first motion simulator ride I had ever been on. But given that I was still, in elementary school at the time, I probably didn't have a whole lot of experience. But I think it was, the general public's first, real experience in a motion simulator ride. Where, you essentially get in a box and the box moves up and down and around and you're wondering how it looks so realistic on the inside. Now, round about 2010, they closed down the original Star Tours to reinvigorate it, retool it, and reopen it as Star Tours The Adventure Continues. And at those times, the Starspeeders got a makeover. They went from this being a Starspeeder 3000 to a Starspeeder 1000, so it's technically an earlier generation. But the big key was that now you had multiple segments of your ride, and your segments were randomized, so you could have any number of different planets you could go to. And that was all in its attempt to make the ride rewritable, to be able to get a different experience every time. I will say this, as much as I liked the original Star Tours, I had gotten so bored of it by the end of its run. Off the top of my head, I could recite every line of that ride and just keep going through it. Welcome aboard! I'm Captain Rex in the cockpit. I know it's probably your first flight, and it's mine too. You could just, read along with the script as it was going on and on. But one thing I always wanted was toys from the ride so I could interact with my Hasbro stuff. And for a long time we were kind of denied that. One of the earliest toys we got were just simple 4-inch PVC figures, and most of those were actually based off of the Star Wars Droids cartoon designs. So R2 and 3PO looked very cartoony. And so you just kind of had to live with that. Around the early 2000s, Hasbro actually started putting out figures based on the ride characters. So you could get a Captain Rex, you could get G2 droids, and they were obviously in scale with Hasbro's Star Wars line. That was great. But, there was always something kind of missing, and that was the Starspeeder, the whole star of the attraction. What we did get a Starspeeder eventually, but, it's a little small. It'll do, but, you definitely can't put your Hasbro figures in it. I think this might work better with Micro Machines Action Fleet toys. This particular one was the original release. It's got a 2002 copyright on the bottom. You can see it's not terribly accurate to the ride vehicle itself. It's only got 3 doors for one, and it should have 5. And it's a little squat. R2 is kind of big on top, but it's got some fun features. There's some sounds. And there's a little button over here that'll make the doors open. And you can see there's actually a light up inside, so you can see the doors. And then we've got these 2 buttons on the bottom that make different noises. So this one's just a humming in space noise. And this one is an exclamation from Captain Rex. It also operates the blasters up front. Now you can open the cockpit by pulling up on the list here, and you can see a bunch of chairs inside, and like I said, you can probably fit some Action Fleet figures in there. There's a little figure of Rex in there. He's very simplified. He can come out. That's what he looks like. It always kind of bothered me because he was missing his blue visor, and that was one of his key features in the ride, is that he had the blue visor on his forehead and kind of acted like his eyebrows, so you could get some emotion off the figure that way. So by not putting it on there, you're kind of losing some detail. Now, when they decided to close and retool Star Tours, which was initially called Star Tours 2.0 before they really put any information out on what we were getting, one of the D23s put out an updated version of this vehicle with the new paint scheme. And it's not exactly the same, though R2 makes the same noise. This thing has actually been slightly retooled. The biggest change between the Starspeeder 3000 and the Starspeeder 1000 is the length of the blasters up front. And as you can see, these have been retooled to just nip off that last half-inch there. The date stamp has also been changed from 2002 to 2010. And there's one further change. You no longer have a Captain Rex in the front, it's just a full row of chairs. Now that's because Captain Rex is no longer your captain. What you end up with is a comically misplaced C-3PO is in charge of your ride at that point. And they also changed up the back, so the buttons still open the doors, but now
Star Tours is proud to introduce the Starspeeder 1000.
Yes, that's Allison Janney's voice. You can see we've got a scene from one of the possible planets you could go to, which was Tatooine in a pod racer race. And so they also changed up the ship noises too. It's obviously a soaring to light speed there. And then you have your standard in-space noise again. So, it was nice having the two versions of your ride vehicle there as toys. Clearly this one got upped in the budget for paint because it's a lot more detailed than this one. This is missing a lot of little things on it. But that wasn't the only thing they made. After many years, we finally got our request. We got a Starspeeder that could hold 3 3/4 inch figures. And this has got just about everything you could hope for. I got the initial release, which came out when the second version of Star Tours debuted in 2011. So this was all very new. It comes with an R2. He's a very basic action figure. He can only rotate his dome. But he is removable, so you can replace him with any astromech you might have. And when you place him in and you press down, he can make some noise. That's great. There's actually a second droid in here, which is a little camera droid. The idea being that sometimes you get overhead shots of your ship and that you can see from inside the cabin, and it's the little droid you're seeing is broadcasting to you. You can see it's got the shorter blasters of a Starspeeder 1000. They have some LEDs at the end. And then there's a little button here for some extra blaster power. I'm not quite sure why we suddenly went from 2 blasters to 4, but, you know, why not?
Well, this is supposed to be, like, this is the version of the speeder that would exist at the time of the prequels. That's correct, right?
I believe so. I don't know. That's kind of what I got at the time. I don't know if I read that somewhere or if it was just the gist of it, but I believe that's the idea. And taking cues from the smaller ones, the little buttons in the back in the same location as general as what you have before. So, oh, I love that little welcoming noise. And yes, you can set it so that the doors will stay open or have them close fully.
And as you pointed out, that sound actually was taken from the ride, because that's the sound that, hey, the doors are open and everybody's safe to walk in.
Yeah, it's kind of their chime. You got that all the time in the old ride. You can pull the top off as before, and as you might be able to see, I've got some figures occupying the seats already. And they also include some of the old Hasbro Star Tours figures. So while he represents the Disney World uniform that is no longer at the parks, how could I refuse that?
So those figures were released prior to that coming out, or around the same time?
Prior to.
Okay.
Also, if you're a real fan of Ewoks Battle for Endor, that was the only place you could get a teak figure. There were some sets that did come out when the new ride did. So this is a figure of what your proper captain was supposed to be before he gets distracted and walks off and leaving 3PO in the seat. Now, one of the fun features is, you can see once again we've got some pod racing in the cockpit, but this is a slide that comes out. You actually have multiple screens you can fit in there to coincide with the multiple options of your ride vehicle. But
My pod race! I've always wanted to do this.
that's one of the things. When you put in the screen and then you can press the button in the back, you'll have 3PO exclaiming different things, or Yoda, as the case may be. So there was Tatooine. We've got the Death Star.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I'm glad we had that line because, you know, you kind of always need that on your Star Wars adventure, right? Yoda hologram.
May the Force be with you.
And Hoth.
Hold on to your seconds.
Now keep in mind, this ship was actually made by Disney. This is not made by Hasbro. So the fact that it's compatible with the Hasbro Star Wars figures is them being very generous to us. One feature, though, that I thought is incredibly nice of them. So, as I mentioned, 3PO is now our captain. He can sit in that little chair, but the chair is removable. And if you'll notice, that divot there is a little more complex than what the circular base of his chair actually needs to be. That is because you can take a Captain Rex figure that Hasbro put out 6 years prior and place him and lock him in place as your captain. That's just a great feature I love. It kind of makes me want to buy a second one of these and paint it in the original Star Tours Starspeeder colors, but I don't have the skill or the patience.
Did they re-release Captain Rex at any point after this came out, or were you just kind of left to go to eBay looking for one?
I know they made a red and white Captain Rex in a 3-pack after this came out, because all the Captain Rexes they put in the ride, they ended up in the Q line. One Captain Rex was left as normal with a little defect sign on him, and the other ones were painted as different variations of the same droid, one of which is that red and white color scheme.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it seems like even though Hasbro did not release this, it definitely feels like whoever did put this together worked closely either with Hasbro or with Hasbro's releases to make sure that things would function together.
Absolutely, and it's a great addition to your collection. It's one of the larger scale vehicles that I like to hold on to, like the big Millennium Falcon or the newer X-Wings that are better scaled to the figures themselves.
Or the Park Sandcrawler now. I kind of have to wonder, how common are the Starspeeders now if you were in Disney? How common are the Starspeeders now that there's also shelf space being given to the Sandcrawler?
Well, that's the thing. The Starspeeders have disappeared from the park shelves.
Okay.
Kind of sad. But I should point out, I have the initial release of this. And this disappeared for a few years after it came out. But when The Force Awakens came out in 2015, they actually added a scene into Star Tours based on the Jakku starship battle. And when they did that, they reissued the Starspeeder. But it was updated a little bit. Pat?
Yes, I actually, whenever Phillip and I were in Disney World for the G.I.Joe convention, I had always wanted to go on Star Tours. It definitely was like the first thing that I wanted to make sure that I did while I was in the park. And it didn't disappoint me at all. I loved doing it. We did, we went on the ride several times. And then in the gift shop, I see the Starspeeder, and I had to buy one just to kind of have one as a souvenir. I ended up, I think, buying it once I got home because it made more sense to buy it and have it shipped rather than to buy it there and then figure out my own shipping. But the one that I received is the second one. So mine has a few differences. I think that we were just kind of talking about them before we started recording. But the major one really is the inclusion of this. which is the Jakku scene. And I don't actually have the Tatooine one. These scenes have these segments in the bottom of them that correspond to a button that they press when you put them in there that then dictates which sound you're going to get out of them. And the Tatooine one has been replaced by Jakku, but I don't mind. This thing is definitely awesome. Most of the details seem to be the same. It does seem like I got a few different things that are now tampos rather than stickers. And I will point out that whenever I push my doors open, let me see if I actually can do it. Oh, I'll do it if I push the right button. Let's see here. Yeah, see, I can actually get my doors open without having the sound, and I think that I've seen other people mention that online as well. Whenever Phillip was showing me his, I heard the sound, and I was a little bit disappointed. I actually thought that they'd taken it out of here, but it isn't. It's in the newer ones, you just kind of have to jam it a little bit more. There it is. So you just have to hit the button a little bit harder, and that sound does happen, even though I think I've seen people reporting online that this one is missing that sound. It's not. Yeah, but other than that, it mostly seems to be the same. And I know that around here there's a tampo that I think is a decal on Phillip's, but we were kind of comparing them and can't really find a whole lot of differences other than that.
I should point out these are not the only Starspeeders they have put out over the years. For a while they had like a little pullback motor Starspeeder that would zoom along a flat surface. I've got this Metal Earth Starspeeder, which is kind of funny because the etching design would indicate it's a Starspeeder 1000, but it's got the longer blaster of the Starspeeder 3000. And then there are some die-cast, sort of Hot Wheels sized, which I think you can still pick up in the parks.
Yeah, and those Hot Wheels sized ones, I think those are colored like all the various Starspeeders that you see in the new version of the ride. Is that correct?
Well, right now you can only get the red and white Star Tours colors, but when Adventures Continues first opened, there was about like a 5-pack that had them in different colors, which indicated different companies.
Okay, and I think that whenever I was shopping for this, you were also, and you know, you were encouraging me to buy it. You also mentioned that it appeared in Episode 7. Is that right?
Yeah. When the First Order is attacking Jakku and Rey and Finn are trying to run to get to a spaceship to take off, as they're running towards the ship that will ultimately be blown up in front of them, there's a Star Tours ship taking off in the background. It's like far in the background, blurry, and you see it for maybe half a second. But it's there.
Yeah, I don't know in story where these Star Tours ships, like what kind of tour they're taking, that it's like, hey, let's visit all the bleak worlds like Jakku and Hoth. But it's fun. Who knows? Maybe a smuggler modified one of these and is using it. There's definitely a lot of storage space in back.
I think in one of the original Thrawn trilogies, there's a section where they mention a Starspeeder showing up, and they say, you know, peacetime brings the tourists.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Yeah, it's definitely kind of a different segment of Star Wars that you really don't get unless you go to the park. And I love the fact that we have this entire thing that's going to this entire Star Wars park that's going to open that I'm sure everybody can't wait for. But the interesting thing about Star Tours is that it goes with the vintage Star Wars, and vintage Star Wars will always have a special place with most of us. So I love the fact that there's a modern version. They haven't let it, you know, die on the vine. They've kept it updated and kept it interesting, and it also existed way back when. So we kind of have both, best of both worlds. I love the fact that they made it so that Captain Rex can fit in there. And you're right, if somebody has customized one of these to look like the Starspeeder 3000, I would love to see that online. If somebody has actually taken the full-size one of these and done a full-on custom. It feels like something where the difference in guns should just be available on Shapeways, or somebody should have made those available so you could just pop them on and you know, grab a can of spray paint and change this up. But I also can understand why, you know, there aren't just a ton of these lying around. You know, you're not just going to happen across, you know, 12 of them at a flea market for $5 so that you can modify them. So I can kind of understand why it's not happening, because it's not something you're going to see in large supply.
The last time I saw one of these in the parks was over the summer, and then I think it was just them selling out the rest of the stock they had, and that's been it. They've been gone, but these disappeared once and they came back. I would imagine that they would bring these back again. They did add more scenes on Crate when The Last Jedi came out, so I can only imagine that when Episode 9 comes out, we'll get another segment on there, and that would seem like a great time to bring back the Starspeeder.
I would agree, and if not bringing it back, hey, if somebody would potentially just release the 3000 so that, you know, people at the park at that time may not care or know and would buy that one, and then maybe people who already have them would pick up both, I think that would be awesome. Because you're right, it's definitely scaled, and it goes along with all those larger Star Wars vehicles like the AT-AT or the big Millennium Falcon.
They've already put out some preview merchandise for Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, and one of them is a hat that has DJ Rex on an illustration on it. So we're all expecting that Captain Rex will be there in Batuu, which is the planet you're at.
As a DJ, then?
Yeah, apparently.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I wonder if they'll end up taking the Rex robots out of the Star Tours queue.
I would imagine it's a new animatronic they've built using maybe the existing mold.
And I kind of have to wonder which one is supposed to be the original Captain Rex.
I'm guessing it's supposed to be the one that's the defective in the ride, because you can still hear him say some lines from the original Star Tours if you listen long enough.
I want to complete my collection of these. It's such a nice little subset of Star Wars figures to collect. It definitely has a lot more meaning if you've actually been on the ride. As somebody who most of that stuff came out prior to me being on the ride, it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, and while they've made some of the droids from the Star Tours 2.0, there was enough time that Hasbro put out versions of like every droid that was there in the original Star Tours queues. And I'm not just talking Disneyland and Disney World, but also Disneyland Paris and Tokyo Disneyland. They also have Star Tours, and they also have some unique droids in their lines.
Yeah, you know what? And going to Star Tours is fun. Going to Star Tours with Phillip is more fun because he tells you all these facts as you're going through the queue. It's like I'm getting a guided tour. I believe I remember something cool you were telling me about some of the droids. Weren't they borrowed, like the ones that look kind of like birds, weren't they borrowed from a previous queue that they were just kind of redressed and brought in?
In the original Star Tours at Disneyland, the G2 droids, the ones you see in the queue, and they're still there, if you look at their feet, they're informally called the geese droids. They were actually birds in an attraction called America Sings. And for the longest time you had a quartet of white feathered birds there. Well, about a year or so before Star Tours opened, the quartet became a trio. So the multiple iterations of them suddenly went down by one, and suddenly there were some bird-like droids in your queue at Star Tours. So that was kind of amusing.
Well, that's definitely awesome. What else do we have for today? Probably want to mention this. This just came out maybe a week or so ago. Several of you are probably familiar with Mark Bellomo's books. This was the first edition. Honestly, this book is so recognizable at this point because you do a search for G.I.Joe book, this is going to be one of the ones that pops up. The second edition was this one. Also a great cover. I love this. I was particularly impressed at the condition of the figures that were on the cover. You know, getting a nice, good Cobra Commander that's not yellowed and doesn't have any problems in his mask is hard. And then you start looking at the other details, like his feet. There's like no paint missing at all from the other of these figures. So I was impressed with that with this book. And the information, it was one of these situations where it was worth upgrading from the first book to the second book because he didn't just reprint the thing. Everybody wanted the copies of it. It was sold out. He didn't just reprint it. He actually put a lot more information in there. But more recently, here is the third edition that I received the hardback. Once again, he went back and made sure that he wasn't just putting out the book again and, you know, asking us to buy it. He actually was putting a lot of work in it once again to make sure that everything was updated and that he included new information. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Totally went through. One of the things that I really liked about the second edition was that the photographs were retaken on a lot of them, and you got better clarity, some better looks at things. So I don't have the third volume in hand just yet. I do plan on getting it, but I am looking forward to the upgrades. Also worth pointing out, it's a hardcover now. The first two were just paperback, but this one, nice, sturdy, thick cover.
Yeah, and I also have to mention that there's a mention of 2 super geniuses in here. I'm not one of them. Terry, it's you and
just
Terry.
A regular
you
genius.
and Terry. Yeah, I'm just a regular genius. That's okay, but no, he definitely mentioned you in the book too, so that's kind of awesome. So you definitely have to have it.
Woo! I don't get money from it though. I should point that out.
Yeah, so definitely, if you're into G.I. Joe, which hopefully you are if you're watching this.
Otherwise, why are you doing here?
That's right. What are you doing here? Other than family that watches us to give us clicks or something. I don't know what you'd be doing.
Hi, Mom.
But if you already have those books, I'm just mentioning it because if you already have them, it's still worth picking up his updated version. And from what I understand, it was selling fast. It may have even sold out actually on Amazon. I believe that he was trying to make sure that he could get copies in quickly. So take a look at it, but be patient because it's a hot book right now.
The Krause Publications is making sure that everybody who wants a copy is going to get one. I know they've sold out on their own website as of a few days ago. It might be back in stock by this point. I'm not sure. I can't, see the future. I know people were going down to Walmart. I hear Books A Million and Barnes & Noble might still be options. So look around. You should be able to get one. I know Amazon is still taking orders. You just might have to wait a while for it to ship to you.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, that was a bit of it that I didn't know about. So I'm glad that you were aware of that because I did hear that it was kind of a hot book. You probably shouldn't waste any time putting those orders in though, because if they have to do anything to get those other copies to you, you probably want to be on that list as soon as possible.
And just announced over the weekend, from when we're filming this, Mark said he's going to be making a second edition of his Star Wars book.
Nice.
And this will include the die-cast minifigures and the bases as well. Alright, that's all for this edition of Articulated Points. Let us know what you think in the comments on social media. What do you think on the smallest Joes? You team ball joint hip or team swivel hips? When it comes to having a Starspeeder, is this something you definitely want to add to your collection, or is it a gigantic waste of space that you just don't have the room for? And a third edition of the Ultimate Guide to G.I. Joe, is it something you need to add in your library? Something you're looking for? Let us know what you got. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching this episode of Articulated Points. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about some of the toys featured in this episode or want to follow us on social media, links are in the description below this video.